One of the interesting characters that I cite from liberally throughout the book is an individual, a barrister from Great Britain, known as Ernest Belfort Bax. Now, Bax was an interesting character. He made some dubious claims about economics, or at least claims that were dubious in my opinion. Nonetheless, he gives a very good analysis of this imbalance in the law. He took notice of how the law was relieving married women of their obligations while at the same time imposing pretty harsh punishments on men who failed to live up to their obligations. And I'm going to share a couple quotes. I provided a lot of his quotes, but there's a good one that I think sets the tone for how the law was changing in terms of married men and married women. And he says as follows. He says, "The husband is liable and his wife is not for all the civil wrongs she may commit. Under the older English law, the rule was reasonable enough. Now, however, it is only an illustration of the pro-feminist bias of the courts. Every moth-eaten scrap of privilege which is in favor of the woman, they retain. All the privileges of the husband, no matter how firmly established, they deny as having ever existed." Again, this is spot on. And this, of course, is not whining on behalf of men, and this is once again not an opportunity to disrespect women. These were complicated issues. The reasons for these changes were complicated. Nonetheless, we should be aware of this, because a lot of this sets the stage for how the law developed thereafter. There's another passage from a law review article. This was from a Raymond J. Margles. And the title of this article was "The Extent of a Husband's Obligation to Support His Wife." This was from St. John's Law Review. This was from 1938. He says as follows. He says, "As a necessary incident to the marital relation, there is imposed on the husband the duty to support and maintain his wife and family in conformity with his condition and station in life. Today, most of the states have strengthened this common law obligation by statute, imposing both civil and criminal liability on delinquent husbands." You see, prior to the innovations of the 1800s, men still faced consequential obligations for not providing for their wives financially. However, those obligations were civil. Certainly a man could end up in debtor's prison, as noted previously, but this was still not typically dealt with criminal law. This started to change. Many states and common law countries started imposing criminal obligations on men who did not provide for their wives and their families. Again, Bax notes as follows. "Since 1857, the secular courts, which then assumed jurisdiction in matrimonial matters," he says the secular courts because ecclesiastical courts had dealt with these issues prior, but since 1857, the secular courts, which then assumed jurisdiction in matrimonial matters, has given up all attempt to enforce obedience, but the most violent methods, including imprisonment and sequestration of property of the husband, are employed to enforce her claim to maintenance. Now, it should be noted, right around this time, this is when the law starts to get really strict with men and child support as well. And as we'll see, this continued to develop to where men had very, very consequential obligations and faced very, very harsh punishments for not living up to these obligations.